could make that adjustment. We have a nice group registered and looking forward to more. So Chag Sameach, Shavuot begins this evening. And I'd just like to remind you that there's a Shabbat service at 7:30 together with other local synagogues, and then 30-minute learning sessions starting at 8 and moving onward. I'll be doing a session on Abraham Joshua Heschel. So I'm on twice today. That's pretty good for a retired guy. I'll be doing something on Heschel at 8 o'clock. Rabbi Miller's at 8:30, Cantor Rubel's at 9, Rabbi Prosnitz at 10:30, and rabbis of other regional congregations are with us as well. The full schedule will be on the e-blast. There'll be an e-blast this afternoon, and you'll be able to register for any of those classes and for the service tonight. And there's also Shavuot morning service tomorrow at 10 a.m. I think that covers those announcements. And if you have any questions, you can put them up on chat. So let's begin. We plan to go till 12 noon today. And I'm just thrilled to welcome again to our congregation my friend, my buddy, Rabbi Rex Perlmeter. Rex and our family have known each other for 44 years. Can you believe that? He doesn't look that old, but 44 years. During that time, personal friend, close friend of our family, friend of Temple Emanu-El, and could go on and on. Rex was senior rabbi of Temple Israel in Miami, and then of Baltimore Hebrew congregation, and now resides in Montclair. Do you notice the geographical movement up the East Coast? We've talked about that, but Miami to Baltimore to Montclair, and we're thrilled that he's part of our extended community. After Rex's really extraordinary career as senior rabbi, he moved on another direction and became a licensed clinical social worker, has taught on numerous occasions at Temple Emanu-El. He founded the Jewish Wellness Center, and also through the Central Conference of American Rabbis and the Hebrew Union College has provided, and is providing, probably doing so today as well, guidance and counsel to rabbis. I've been eager for him to be with us during this particular challenging time, because I thought that he had some important teachings and insights to bring to us. So our subject today is, do you need help in navigating this crisis? Are there one or two of us out there? I'll raise my hand. Need help in navigating, yes. Navigating this crisis, look to the divine qualities within you. So Rex, thank you very much for traveling down to Westfield virtually. Instead of 30 minutes, it took you about 30 seconds, right? And that's one of the advantages of this terrible virus. Welcome once again to sort of your second home, Temple Emanu-El Westfield. You're known and beloved by many.
Thank you. Thank you. And spiritually, it definitely is. And in fact, it is not the first time that I've had the privilege of teaching in the presence of you as one of my most significant mentors, Chuck, and I'm really honored and certainly dedicate this teaching today to you who really, starting 44 years ago, helped me understand the importance of bringing these qualities into my life as a professional and as a human being, and challenged me to do so, despite the fact that it's not always easy work. It continues not to be easy work. I also have to say I have a bit of a chuckle. It occurred to me that with my clients, all of whom I'm seeing, of course, by Zoom at this point. By the way, I'm not yet an LCSW.
Okay.
The board is meeting on my application in 2 weeks. I'm a licensed social worker. I passed the test, and hopefully in 2 weeks I will be an LCSW. I do want to assure your congregants and some people with whom I've studied previously as well, that I do own books. I am truly a rabbi, and there are books, but at the moment they are all in boxes because we are continuing the trek north to which Chuck referred, eventually at some point to move into New York City. So we're kind of mitten drinnen, as they say in the sacred tongue, in the middle of things.
Thank you for your kind words. I didn't say anything about the chat room. Do you want to mention?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So as we move, because of the structure of the webinar and what it does and does not permit us, today is going to be a little more frontal than those of you with whom I've studied know tends to be my style. Not that I lack in the ability to pontificate, but I do encourage you heartily, please, if you have questions, comments, concerns, please put them into the chat box. Rabbi Kroloff's going to be monitoring that on our behalf and will either interrupt me happily receiving such interruptions if interruption is required, or there will be points at which I will break to ask for referral of questions that have come up if they were able to hold. And in case anybody doesn't know how to use the chat feature, if you bring your cursor down to the lower part of your window, if you're on a computer, of the Zoom window, you'll see a menu pop up, and one item is chat. It shows a little thought box and dialog box, and you click that and it'll send out. If you're on an iPad, that same bar is at the top of the window. Okay, so having trouble finding your way in the time of COVID. There is a method to Rabbi Kroloff's and my madness in asking you all to veer from the path of Monday learning. And the language of path is going to come up today repeatedly and appropriately. And it relates very directly to the timing of this class. Chuck mentioned that tonight is Shavuot, and as I imagine most of you are aware, the name Shavuot literally means weeks. In English, one of the names of this holiday is the Feast of Weeks, and that is because this holy day, this festival, as described first in Sefer Vayikra in the book of Leviticus, is not given a name. It is simply described in terms of time. And that time is 7 weeks from the first night, full night of Passover. So we have Erev Pesach, which is the night of first Seder. And then the next night, the night ending the first day of Pesach, is the beginning of a period that is called the Omer. And the Omer is the time when we begin counting off those 7 weeks. So seven weeks of 7 days equals 49. And then on the 50th day, those 7 Shavuot having passed, we celebrate Shavuot. So, and just for those who enjoy connections, the parallel in the Christian world is Pentecost. And you hear in relation to 50, the penta, the number 5, as generating that holiday, which is the Christian version of the revelation, as Shavuot is our experience of that phenomenon. I mentioned the word path because those 49 days are understood spiritually in our tradition as describing a path. For the first 7 of them, of course, the spiritual work is internal, getting out the chametz, getting out the leaven, and getting ready for the journey. Because, of course, those 7 days were the days that found us getting out of Egypt and arriving at the Red Sea. Traditionally, it is understood that on the 7th day, we arrived at Yam Suf, at the Sea of Reeds, the Red Sea, and that is when the remarkable events of Exodus 14 and 15 occur, and the Israelites cross over the sea on dry ground into the Midbar. Our tradition then takes that image of the wandering that begins and emerges from this place of great squeezing, constriction, terror, into the Midbar, and says, God medaber b'midbar. So you hear the consonants there, medaber midbar, that God speaks in wilderness. I cannot think of a time communally other than perhaps the period post 9/11 in my lifetime, which has felt so extremely like a midbar. There have been other moments of constriction communally, certainly moments of personal, but this has been kind of a wilderness. And when Rabbi Kroloff approached me about teaching, we talked about dates in June, and then I said, what you're asking me to do, I think really belongs as a sort of culminating pre-Shavuot teaching, because the way our tradition has evolved these 50 days has been to understand them as a time when we can bring ourselves into a midbar, into a place of discovery, into a place of hearing God's presence and growing ourselves from this moment of almost a birthing to the arrival at Sinai, where we really come into the fullness of who we are meant to be in partnership with God. And P.S., the tradition says, then the next day we had to start all over again. And that is the nature of our life, right? I find this with clients with whom I work all the time, that they're astounded to realize that part of the work of spiritual and psychological growth is going back over old material again and again, because each time we learn more. Gee, it sounds a little bit like a teaching from a tradition I once knew, Hafoch ba hafoch ba dechulaba. Turn it over and turn it over again, because everything is within it. Torah is our life. Going back over and learning and deepening is who and what we are as Jews. So that's broad introduction. Specific introduction to the 50 days. In the Kabbalistic tradition, a practice has grown over the years of using these 7 weeks as a period specifically of identifying qualities of humanity that we want to refine, qualities that are affirmed in Jewish teaching, in Torah, that can help us be, if you will, more worthy of arriving at Sinai and receiving Torah. There's a roadmap to that in our tradition. And here's where I'm going to probably frighten some of you. Take a breath. It'll be okay. This is, for some, a familiar picture, I imagine. For others, perhaps not. This is the Kabbalistic tree of life, the Eitz Chaim. And it describes a way of understanding existence and the coming into being of existence. To understand this, we need to develop an understanding of a wonderful concept that we get from Neoplatonism called emanation. This, of course, is a sacred photo of a chocolate fountain, because we all know that chocolate is the true proof of God in the universe. Our tradition holds, in keeping with this philosophical concept, that when we are told by Torah that God created the world, the way in which God did so was by emanating, by first pulling back from a part of God's own self, pulling in from a reality in which God was everything. God was infinite. There was no space, there was no time, there was only God. And God, according to our tradition, pulls God's self in to create a space, and then, if you will, broadcasts part of God's own self into that void to allow creation to take place. The way that this teaching develops in medieval times is that the pure essence of the Godhead was too much for this void to sustain and contain. And so God has to broadcast this part of God's self, God's light, if you will, through a series of manifestations, each of which is more gradually approaching material, physical existence as we know it. So, if you will, at the top of the fountain or above it is the Godhead, and then a part of God's light diffuses and drips down and diffuses into the first sphere, and then further, and so on, until finally landing in the pool of physical reality, which is making me really hungry. So we're going to move back to the photo, or to the diagram. So in this diagram, above even the tree of life is that which is called Ein Sof, the unending, the infinite, God filling all and nothing. And then below are these 10 manifestations, these emanations of God. This is not a course on Kabbalah. We're not going to go into the concept of these emanations, these sfirot, very deeply. But I just wanted you to see this idea and to understand for a moment that what our tradition teaches, oh, that line got moved. So I'm gonna have to, the line here, and this is my mistake, should be actually down here, where you can see my cursor. The upper three of these qualities are understood as pertaining exclusively to the divine. They are intangible divine aspects that are the source of God's creativity. For our purposes today, we can actually disregard them. What we're going to be focusing on are these lower 7. Now, in Kabbalah, in the philosophical, cosmological realm, these are called sfirot, literally spheres, bodies of emanation. For any of you that have ever read Dante, you may, which, as Chuck knows, is sort of one of my touchstones. You may recall the idea of 7 heavens. These would be the parallels of the 7 heavens, the spheres of God's influence. In mysticism, and ultimately in the practice of Musar, which I know has been studied to some degree at Temple Emanu-El, the sfirot are also understood as bearing qualities. So they have another name, midot, which means qualities, aspects of the divine. And different qualities are associated with each of the lower 7 midot. The next thing that becomes important to us to understand then is that since all creation emanates from God, all creation contains elements of these sefirot. These are all aspects of everything that exists in the universe, including ourselves. And so, unfortunately, because I had to blow this up from a little document, it's hard for you to read. But what, in fact, this document shows is that the sefirot can be mapped onto the human body. The 3 upper, Keter, Chochmah, and Bina, are all understood as being associated with mind. And then we get Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. Of course, for today, not expecting that everyone will have learned all 10 of these Hebrew names. Those lower 7 we're going to come back to and give English names to. But I want you to see how seriously the tradition takes the idea that these emanations of God exist in us. Why is that important? Here's one of the things that I think is remarkable about Judaism. Our tradition thinks we're pretty awesome in potential. As we know, an essence of Christian belief, and I say this without judgment, but just as a matter of what differentiates, is the idea of original sin, and developed further, particularly by Paul, formerly Saul of Tarsus. The essential idea of Christianity is that human beings, by virtue of our sinfulness, cannot redeem ourselves. We can only be redeemed, brought into the fullness of God's love and whatever reward that means, through grace, through God freely offering to take us in by offering up God's Son, etc., etc. But the essential pinpoint there about human nature is grounded in the idea of our sinfulness. As I experience it, the outlook of our tradition is more optimistic, not entirely optimistic, but more optimistic. Perhaps embodied most familiarly to most of us in the iconography of the High Holy Days, the idea that on the holidays, we are in balance between deeds of good and deeds of evil. And we, on those days, seek to turn that balance to the good. But the essential optimism is that we have the power to do that. Kabbalah and mysticism take it a step, Kabbalah, mysticism, and Musar take it a step further. They say that the qualities of these sefirot, because we are emanations of God, live within us. So if the qualities of the sefirot are to be understood as, and I'm going to have to switch this up, are to be understood as infinite love, compassion, and connection, boundaries, doing and restlessness, being and acceptance, discernment and balance, and showing up with the divine in you. If we are to understand these as existing within us, then we have to ask, why don't we live these all the time? Why don't we always manifest infinite love and balance? The answer is because this divine aspect of who we are is also mixed up with the material and earthly and time bound. And it's not about flesh being weak and spirit weak and flesh strong, or how I'm blanking on the correct quotation at the moment. It is really about that we get distracted. We get caught up in the stuff that we desire, or that we fear we don't have, or just fear. Fear of not having enough, fear of not being enough. And when those things crop up, they get in the way of the best part of who we are. I heard a teaching by Alan Marinus, a great current teacher of Jewish Musar practice, ethical practice, who suggests that our souls, our neshama, are like rough silver ore, if you will. So if you could look at it, what you would see is dusty, gray, opaque. But if we polish it, if we do the work of polishing that neshama, it starts to clean and clear. And ultimately, it allows, as you shine it completely, it will allow the divine light that is within wholly to shine forth. But I want you to hear the essential principle is that it's already in you. All we're trying to do is bring it forth. So what is the tradition? The tradition is that during the 7 weeks of the Omer, these 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot, 1 week is spent on each of these lower 7 midot, lower 7 sfirot, these qualities. Studying about it, thinking about it, picking up practices maybe that can help us work on it. So what I'd like to do, and let me pause here. That's by way of introduction. And then I'm going to go through each of the 7 briefly, and then we'll do a little bit of a practice exercise. So, moderator, have we any questions?
We do not have questions at this time, but we welcome them. And I'm looking at the chat room. So if you have anything, I just add that I think it's the idea of working on a midah, which is the singular of midot, one each week is a wonderful structure for taking us through this time. And will you share with us, I think this is where you're going, you share with us how we might work on one or more of these?
Yes, sir. That is where we are going.
Wonderful.
All right. So
I'll let you know if there are any comments as we move along.
Okay, great. So we're going to go back to our slide, which during the time I cleaned up a little bit. So let's start with the first quality. So the first week, and I should pause to rewind a moment. We are at the end of these 7 weeks of practice, but there's nothing to say.
Forgive me, but I do have a question. So, which I don't want to forget. Will your slides be available? And could you repeat the name of the Musar teacher?
So yes, well the session is being recorded,
right?
So the slides will be visible in the recording. I derived these from pictures I picked up from the internet, and I don't know if those are copyrighted.
Right. I think you mentioned Rhinus.
No, so the teacher
yes.
To whom I was referring is Alan Marinus,
Of course.
Morinis. And his two most prominent books, one is called Everyday Holiness, and the other is Climbing Jacob's Ladder. Everyday Holiness is the one that pertains more to cultivating the practices around the midot. Does not restrict only to 7, because there are many midot, there are many qualities, but it's a great resource for personal and group practice. And then I will mention one other resource, and this, full disclosure, I have a particular investment in, which is a program of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, where I've done much of my personal growth and training work over the last 10 years plus, which is just concluding a course called Awareness in Action, which is based upon the Omer practice and which is going to remain available if anyone would like to avail themselves of that. That's an online class with video segments and text, as well as practices. So those would be the two primary resources I would recommend, as well as the offerings of your own congregation, which I know deal periodically with these materials. So going to the 7 now in a little more detail, the work begins in chesed. So chesed is a word that is probably familiar to most of you from our prayers, including the line Ki le'olam chasdo, God's compassion or God's loving kindness is eternal. You perhaps have a chesed committee at the congregation which manifests kindness, connection, love to your congregants, especially in times of need. Chesed can be understood as that energy, in a way, that energy with which God emanated into the universe existence. We are energy, right? If you think about the nature of all existence, all physical existence of which we know, it is an embodiment of energy. It is energy become matter, and we are as tangible as we appear to be. We are in fact made of billions of particles that are constantly in motion. So we are part of a sea of motion and of energy, in which and through which we are connected to everything that is, was, ever will be. When we can fall into that awareness of connection, the capacity to tap into the ideal of divine love, of unconditional attachment, unconditional connecting, becomes available to us. And at the same time, we know that if we are nothing but outflowing energy and love, we can't hold. There is no existence. So chesed has to be balanced with gevura, with the idea of boundaries, including the boundaries of the particles that make up this skin and allow this being in this body to exist for a time at least. And similarly, in this time, could there be a more profound challenge than to feel, for example, and Chuck, you and I were talking about this the other day, the immense love we feel for children and grandchildren or other members of family, and yet out of love for one another for these last weeks, we have had to exercise the gevura, the being boundaried by 6 feet of space to avoid hurting those we love or being hurt by in life-threatening ways. So these two qualities are necessary to our existence. Love and strength together make it possible for us to survive. And they meet in the third quality, which is the quality of Tiferet, which is associated with compassion. Because compassion begins and can survive when I can both know myself and my own experience and attune to yours. And for those of you who are professionals in any realm of caregiving, you'll understand in particular how compassion requires both chesed and gevura, the ability to connect and still to remain boundaried, to understand where I end and where you begin. Over-identification with the suffering of another is both destructive to the person who's feeling it and presumptuous against the one whose actual experience one is invading. So these three form a triangle, if you will, of qualities that can help us meet a moment like this, wherein I have to feel my connection to all the suffering that's out there without allowing myself to be overwhelmed by it completely, so that in boundarying myself, I also can find the strength from which I'm going to be able to take action that is illustrative of the compassion that these two qualities allow me to feel. So when we start by working on the internal heartfelt experience of the moment, and then we're ready to move toward the realm of action. So the next quality is to notice within ourselves Netzach. And Netzach means eternity, but it also is related to the Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, it also relates to the concept of victory, as in warfare. So there's an aspect of Netzach that is related to the urge to do, to the impulse to act, which can sometimes be restlessness. I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of Netzach stirring within me over the last 2.5 months. And there's an aspect of it that's great, because when we can affect the world in ways that are positive, we are contributing to creation. But when I act on impulse unwisely, perhaps by going to spring break in Fort Lauderdale when it's not advisable, I am bringing destruction into the world again. Any of these qualities not balanced is a risk. And so the need to do is balanced by the fifth quality, hod, which means traditionally splendor, but it's also the sense of being, of presence, of acceptance. So if Netzach is to do, hod is to be, to pause and just take stock of what is, with an air of acceptance that what is in this moment is what has to be. As some of you know, my wife and I went through a great tragedy 9 years ago when our son died. And the day after his death, my wife turned to me with one of the most divine utterances, I have to put it that way, I've ever heard in my life, saying, we can't live in the world of what might have been. We have to live in the world of what is. That was a moment of hod. And hod can balance against the dissatisfaction of Netzach. There's good to dissatisfaction, but it needs to be balanced also with acceptance, if only for a moment, if only for long enough to be able to evaluate, can I act? Should I act? How should I act? And that is the moment of the sixth quality, Yesod, where I bring discernment and balance to help decide how am I going to manifest in the world. In the seventh quality, Malchut. Malchut, the other name of which is Shekhinah, a name you might recognize, divine presence. How am I going to act in the next moment, or be in the next moment, in the way that most fully shines the divine qualities that live within me? So that's a lot to load on you, and it's a lot to try to do, obviously. I don't know that any of us can wholly do all of those things. And I just realized I was not sharing my screen that whole time that I was going through those. So I will do that now just to remind you of what they are. As I say a word in response to Rabbi Kroloff's question, how do we do it? So let me go back into this so I can bring that up fully for you. So how do we do it? Number one, can't possibly do it all in an hour. But number two is we begin by allowing ourselves time, and maybe it's a week at a time, maybe it's a month at a time, maybe it's a few days at a time, to sit with a single quality. And again, there are resources out there of text, of lectures, of books, and of practices. So for example, if you want to tackle chesed first, a simple practice might be to say to yourself, okay, I'm going to find one person every day to whom to address a random word of kindness. Not a word of gratitude for something they've done for me, but a random word of kindness. Just to say, gee, I love that shirt you're wearing. Or, I really appreciated what you said in the class we attended together the other night. I've been thinking about it. Something as simple as that, a daily act of practice, which will require mindful awareness. Okay, I have to think today. I have to be watching for an opportunity to engage in an act of chesed, a moment of connection. We can do the same thing for each of these seven qualities, to just think about a way in your life, how could I manifest that quality today for the next 7 days? A simple practice. Another practice is to create, if you will, a mezuzah. Take a Post-it note and write the word and put it up somewhere, maybe on your computer screen if you're spending a lot of time online. Just say, practice kindness. Don't be afraid to be strong. Exercise compassion. Or pick a favorite phrase from our tradition or any other literary tradition that, or a movie quote, that will remind you of the quality you're working on at that particular moment. Those are some simple ways to try to cultivate these practices. And again, either of the resources to which I directed you can help you to get there and give you ideas. Another possibility is group work. Find a few people who want to do this work together and brainstorm together what some of those practices might be, and favorite phrases or quotations that help you remember. That's the key here, remembering to remember. Our humanity, our mixed up nature is such that we forget. So we need to be reminded. every day. You have to teach them to your children. V'dibarta bam, you have to talk about them. B'shivtcha v'techa. B'shivtcha uv'shochcha. I'm trying now to put too many phrases together. But we need constant reminders of who we really are. And they're available to us from our tradition. So I'd like to try a practice right now, which is to invite us into a moment of quiet. And in that quiet, I invite you to contemplate these 7 sfirot, these 7 groupings of qualities, and just take a moment for yourself to gaze at them and to allow yourself to let the eyes rest on one wherein you feel actually pretty strong, pretty in touch with your compassion or with your capacity to accept and to be. And just take a moment to sit and encourage that aspect of yourself. See if you can remember a moment recently when you displayed that quality and how it felt and what thoughts came up or come up now around it. Just take a moment, take a couple of minutes to do that right now. Look at the 7 and pick one where you think, yeah, I'm doing okay in that one. And when you've identified the midah, the quality you're going to work with, maybe close your eyes and really dive into, if you can find it, that memory of a moment. And if not, just feel what dwelling on that quality feels like. So let's pause there for a minute. I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a second. And I'm just wondering if anybody is willing to share something that they noticed. And you can do it by chat, or can they raise? I guess they can't really raise their hands in this program.
With chat or Q&A.
Yeah. So, right. Yeah, either one.
Chat, yeah.
So I'd love to hear what anybody noticed in, was it hard or was it easy to find a quality wherein you could say, I'm doing okay on that one? Was it too abstract? Was it hard to choose, easy to choose?
So usually our group is not bashful.
Yeah.
Hi, Terry.
Love to hear from you. I was thinking about the quality of netzach, of action, and in this period, the action of picking up the phone and calling someone who was surprised to hear from me and that's also chesed,
Yeah, kindness.
was a very, I have a good feeling about that, and feeling it endures. On a very pedantic, more pedantic, but very important, when Terry and I are engaged in ordering food. And I know others have expressed this to me as well. A certain sense of being able to control a situation that's out of control.
Mm.
Ordering a loaf of bread is something has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The loaf of bread,
right.
The loaf of bread has it as well as the action.
Great.
Okay, and there's a good feeling there. That's why I think a number of people said they like the food operation because so those are feelings that I had as we did that.
And Phyllis Buxbaum has her hand up. So Phyllis, I've given you the ability to speak if you would like to do so. I think I did.
Okay. I don't see
There
Phyllis.
Okay.
You see Phyllis?
Yep. So
Sure.
Phyllis.
Hi, Phyllis. Oh, that's great.
The feeling under HOD, gratitude that my family's all well, that everybody is in a good place in terms of working, nobody's unemployed, that everybody, that they're good together, that everybody's good, and that we're here for one another.
Gratitude and a kind of acceptance, a kind of peace is easy to access right now for you.
Right. That we're good to each other, that they're good to me, we're good to one another. And we'd like to get back to our lives, but we have each other now.
Great.
I have a couple of other comments here from Marilyn Lieberman. Focusing on balance, I find difficult in respect to family members' problems and committee needs. Is that committee or community? Maybe community.
I think committee.
It could be committee. In other words, finding difficult balance there. Marilyn, does it mean that you're overly focused on these people and these things, that you feel it's out of balance? Is that what you're expressing?
Will they see me?
No.
Okay.
Yep. You're there you go.
This is Marilyn. I think the balance between, I tend to, when somebody shares a problem with me, and I get problems that are being shared with from a variety of people, how to balance my feelings in helping them and not getting too eager, when to step in, when to step out, both within family situations and work that I'm involved in.
Great, thank you. Marilyn, of course, anticipated what our next exercise is going to be, which is a very Jewish thing to do. You went to the difficult. So we're going to go there in a minute, but I do see one more hand that was raised. Well, first of all, we have a comment by Elaine Morgenthal, who also picked Netzach, that doing is something that she's been very focused on, but also finding it in relation to chesed and mode. And then Yvette Golem had raised her hand.
Hello, Yvette. Hi, Yvette. Share with us.
You are unmuted. Well,
can you speak? Are you?
She has to unmute herself.
Okay, unmute yourself, Yvette. There you go.
No, I'm enjoying your job. I'm proud of a social worker.
Okay, thank you. So let's take a moment now to do exactly what Marilyn anticipated. Just a quiet moment to look again at the seven So I'll share my screen again and invite you to contemplate, okay, which one is really hard for me right now? Which is one that I need to do some work on? So we'll share the screen, and there you go. So again, looking at them, letting the eye rest upon the one that, okay, I really need some work on that one right now. I need all 7 of these in my life to fully manifest the divine in me. So what's the one right now that's really calling for some work? When you've found that one, you can either leave the eye resting upon it, or if it's comfortable, close your eyes, and again, dive in, perhaps to a moment of not when you failed in it, but see if you can remember a moment, again, when that quality was more available to you, a moment when it showed up, what it felt like, where you felt it in your body, how it feels, what kind of thoughts are associated with it. And taking a moment, because we are focusing on a place where we feel we need work, where we're recognizing our own lacks, our own failures, perhaps. One thing that I find incredibly important in my practice and in my teaching is to acknowledge the pain that recognizing those lacks, those failures, brings to us, and bringing some compassion to ourselves, not letting ourselves off the hooks, but acknowledging it's hard to acknowledge these failures on my own part. So a little kindness toward myself will actually make it easier for me to try to do better the next time. So having gone to a place of difficulty, just give yourself a little pat, if you will, for having the courage to notice it. And with that pat, perhaps a little bit of a commitment to work on it. I can, I will. And in the minute or two we have left, I'm wondering again if anybody is willing to share.
I do have a comment, Rex,
Yeah.
from Jackie Rose. Jackie says, instead of complaining about what I cannot do, I'm trying to gain wisdom in areas that and then it's cut off, but I assume Jackie gain wisdom in areas that don't feel as strong at, or I haven't had time to focus on. I'm just trying to finish out your sentence for you. I assume that's what you had in mind.
Lovely comment also from Carol Cohen of gratitude to her older son who's been shopping for her and been there for her when feeling lonely. Is anybody willing to share, anyone else willing to share anything about what you noticed in looking for the midah that's perhaps less accessible?
Well, I'd like to talk about boundaries.
Okay, Terry.
Yeah.
Terry's on the live screen here, Terry.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about boundaries I sometimes have it hard to accept the fact that I do have boundaries, that there are things I really can't accomplish that I used to be able to accomplish when I was younger, stronger, etc. And I just have a hard time accepting that, but trying to deal with that.
And that's a good place for bringing some compassion for the suffering. Yeah, it's doubled suffering, right? It's the suffering of the boundary that you don't want, and then it's also the suffering of beating up on yourself for not wanting it, for the resistance to it.
Elaine, thank you, Terry. And Elaine,
It's great.
I'm having troubles with not judging and seeing people not put up boundaries. Yes, Elaine. I'm walking in the park. I'm putting words in your mouth, Elaine, forgive me, but walking in the park and somebody just doesn't give a darn
Yeah.
that he's 18 inches away from me and
Yeah.
whatever. And other things. Yeah.
Yeah. So, the practice in those moments might be, number one, to notice and acknowledge our own irritation. And I certainly have experienced the same. And sometimes the need to say something, which I had to do when I went to a store last week for the first time, and everyone in the store except for one person was wearing a mask, and took some gevura to speak up to him and say, please, and he had a bandana around his neck, please put on your mask, and to stand up to him when he tried to say, well, there's not a law, I don't have to. When that's not available, when that person's running past us and we don't want to get into the possibility of an altercation by yelling at somebody in the park, then what may be helpful is to acknowledge again, here's a little bit of a twist. We notice our irritation, but we forget it's really uncomfortable to live with anger. So again, I'm going to come back to that word pain. There is irritation, but under the irritation, there is pain, because the experience of carrying the irritation is painful. So if I can say, I'm feeling irritated, this is a painful thing, a little rahmanis for myself, a little compassion for this. And you know what? Maybe this person's apparent selfishness, judgment, but that's what's going in my head. Maybe there's something going on with him that I don't know, and maybe he just doesn't get it. So maybe there's some compassion available for him or her as well. Maybe not. That's a lot of work to get to that. So you'll notice a lot of what I'm suggesting here is about noticing, really paying attention to what we're feeling, and accepting the truth of what we're feeling without judging it at first. And so without self-judgment, without beating up on self, I may say, well, that's not where I choose to be, and I'm going to work on getting someplace else. But that's very different than saying, I'm a lousy person because I feel that way. In fact, the latter is an excuse for not taking action. The former is the divine approach, which says, I can do better.
Right. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful statement to complete on, to finish on. And I have an image that has been used a lot during these couple of months. Very few of us are flying these days, but we all know about the oxygen that is available in the event of loss of air pressure. And I'm not saying anything new to you all, but you know that if there's a loss of air pressure and you have somebody that you're looking out for, you breathe yourself first. You take the oxygen first, and then you care for the other person. And I like to think today, Rex, is the oxygen mask is down, and you provided a lot of oxygen, a lot of, and I'm taking a nice deep breath of Perlmeter oxygen with the help of some wonderful comments by participants, and I feel, I think the word is oxygenated. I feel that I have gained strength. Right. So thank you very much, Rex,
Good job.
for being here when we very much needed you, and it was just what we needed today. I hope we'll see many of you tonight or tomorrow morning for Shavuot. We'll at 8 o'clock. I'll talk about we heard about gratitude. Gratitude is a big theme of Heschel, so we'll segue to that. And I think gratitude is a theme of Shavuot as well. So we picked a good day. Thank you so much, everybody. Be well. We may schedule one more lunch and learn in June. Watch for it. Everybody be well, be safe, take good care of yourselves, and Chag Sameach. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Rex.
Chag Sameach. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you.